Lesson 10-1, Squares and Square Roots. A perfect square is a number that has one integer multiplied by itself to obtain the square. So for example, if we have the square root of 144, the perfect square is 144 because two numbers, which is just one number repeated, 12 times 12 is what gives you the 44. So the 144 is a perfect square. Square root of a number is one of two equal factors, which we just saw. So the square root of 144 would be 12. You don't have to list both factors, just one. This symbol that's here outside that we call square root of something, that is called the radical sign, and it is used to indicate a positive square root. Every positive number has both a positive and a negative square root, and we'll look more at that to come. So let's take a look at these two examples. The square root of 9. Well, the square root of 9 would be equal to 3 because 3 times 3 is 9, but you only have to record one of the integers. For the next example, it's the square root of negative 81. For this example, you would say no real solution, and this is because there is not any number that you can multiply by itself to give you negative 81. So if we tried, the number that we would think of would be 9, but if you multiply 9 by 9, that gives you a positive 81. And if you multiplied negative 9 by negative 9, that would give you a positive 81 again. So you can see that we don't multiply anything times itself to give us a negative 81. Now for these two examples, they're a little bit different. We have the negative square root of 64. So what we want to do is we really just want to find the square root of 64, which is the number on the inside, which would be 8, and then you can just add the negative sign out front. So negative 8 is the negative square root of 64. And then the last example says positive or negative square root of 4. So you first want to find the square root of 4, which is 2, and you want to make sure that you include the positive and the negative of that number. Pause the video to try a few examples below. So the first one is negative square root of 16. The square root of 16 is 4, and then you include the negative out front. The next example is the positive negative square root of 100. The square root of 100 is 10, and then you put the positive and the negative out front, so plus minus 10. And then the last example is the square root of negative 49, but we know that we cannot take the square root of a negative number, and so we can just write this one as no solution. Sometimes we are also asked to find the square root of non-perfect squares. This means that we do not know two exact numbers that are the same that you can multiply together to get the number. So for example, when integers are not perfect squares, you can estimate mentally using perfect squares that you do know. So if you have the square root of 33, we can estimate using squares that we do know and kind of estimate what number this would be. So the squares that are before and after 33 is the square root of 25, which is 5, and the square root of 36, which is 6. Since the square root of 33 is closer to the square root of 36, you would say that the square root of 33 is almost 6, or approximately 6. Pause the video to try a few examples below. For the first example, you have the square root of 60. So you want to find the two square roots that are closest to this before and after. So it would be the square root of 49 and the square root of 64. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 64 is 8. 64 is closer to 60, so you would say that the square root here is approximately 8. For the next example, it is negative the square root of 23. So we would use the square root of 16 and the square root of 25. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 25 is 5. The negative square root of 23 is closer to the square root of 25, so you would say that this is approximately negative 5. We can also use calculators to estimate square roots. Depending on the type of calculator that you have, you typically have a square root button. On this particular calculator, it is right here, and so you would want to push that button and then enter the number. So let's say we had an example of the square root of 40. We know this is not a perfect square, so we would have to estimate. So what you would do is you would push that button, and then inside there, you would just type in 40, the number 40. So you use the button to get the symbol, you type in the number 40, and then you hit the equal sign, and it's going to give you a decimal. So it's going to give you a decimal like 6.3245, so on and so forth. So here you could estimate and you could say approximately 6.3. Now if your calculator does not have a button that looks like this one, sometimes there are little letters above buttons and they're in yellow. To get those buttons, you may have to push a shift or a second button to get the radical sign to show up. If you're not sure how to use your calculator to estimate, please bring it to me and I can show you where the button is. That'll help you figure this out. Pause the video to complete the lesson review. Make sure you show me this lesson review for verification of watching this video.